Hey everyone, we're going to do a whiteboard session again today. Based on the Slack feedback, effective product differentiation was the topic at hand. I will do my best to provide some examples as I go through some of these kind of more abstract and conceptual frameworks for differentiation. Give me feedback if it's a little bit obtuse. I'm going to try to make this as accessible as possible so that this is useful and kind of cover both a foundational level of product differentiation, but also maybe talk about some of those more advanced frameworks. So the first thing to think through when we're talking about differentiation is what is the process that a buyer is going through when they're making a purchasing decision? What is that journey and what does that look like? I'll share an example. Recently, we were purchasing a new car. We had an addition to the family, and it was kind of that life milestone where you're making a big purchasing decision and you're going through this process of figuring out what should we get and how do we make that decision. And really what it boils down to is what really matters to me. What are the things that I need to be looking for? What meets my threshold criteria for how I'm going to make this decision. And once I've found those things and compared all of the options, can I justify the purchase price for the thing that fits my needs the most? It might be that I have to make some trade-offs, right? Some compromises on certain things that may not matter as much as that one thing I need to have, the must-haves. And I have to kind of pull down my purchase price capability to kind of match my budget, right? So when you're thinking about that process of how I'm making those trade-offs, what we start to see is that there's two dimensions here, or two aspects, relevance and dimensionality. And I'll break each of these down because these are a little bit, unnecessarily large words, but I think they have a lot of meaning to them, and I want to break it down so that we can kind of understand what I'm trying to get at. Relevance is important when you're thinking about making a sale to a customer, because what you're trying to do is find what matters to that customer, what is relevant to them. And you can think about this in kind of that signal and noise dichotomy. When there's a lot of options, when you go to the grocery store and there's 1,000 options for bread, how do you make a purchase decision on that? It's all the same. It's all bread, right? Unless I go in and I sample 10 or 15 different types of bread, I'm probably not even thinking that there's that big of a difference on the quality, right? How I determine quality becomes kind of a hard to gauge process of looking at like the brand and figuring out, does it look good? Does it have the right marketing positioning? Is it telling me things about them and what they do and their creation of this bread that make me really want it? And what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to separate out that signal from the noise. Signal being what is relevant to me? What do I actually care about, right? And so if I'm thinking about, the different dimensions, and that's where the dimensionality comes in, all of the different aspects of the bread buying process that I care about. Maybe the thing that matters most to me is that it has 100% whole grain. That is what I know to be healthy. I want that. I don't care if it tastes quite as good because I know whole grain is going to have a little bit of that bran flavor in it, but I really want it to be healthy, right? And so I'm going to look for that 100% whole grain. And maybe I'll add in another dimension of, organic or non-GMO, or one of those like marketing terms that don't really mean anything, but tell us, something about that brand and what they care about. And what that's going to do is, as I'm kind of determining those dimensions, this relevance is going to become salient to me. I'm going to be able to sense it as I'm scanning the product landscape, right? And I'm looking at all these competitors. I'm going to start to pick out, okay, those brand elements and that product positioning means that those are my relevant options. So, you start to see things that stand out, and everything else just kind of fades away, right? You don't even consider those options anymore. They're just kind of, they're noise. You put them as irrelevant. They're not for you. They're not 100% whole grain. You're in the wrong section, whatever. Those become irrelevant. And really what you're looking at is those things that have differentiated themselves. They've stood out from the rest because they offer something to you on a dimension you care about that is relevant. And that is ultimately what it means to be differentiated, is you have stood out to the buyer in a significant way. And that's ultimately going to be what you hope will allow them to make the purchasing decision. Now, price comes into this, right? Because when you're thinking about competition and competing in a very competitive market, there's two levers that you can pull: differentiating your product, making it better, making it stand out to the buyer, or being cheaper, right? And ultimately, when you think about a differentiation strategy, you're trying to avoid reducing your price and making price the way that you compete, because that is what we call commodification. You become a commodity. You're just the same as everything else. It's all bread in a plastic sheet. There's no branding, there's no positioning. If I'm just looking at all the breads out there and they all look the same, I don't care, right? I'm just going to buy whatever loaf looks decent, right? You're not differentiating yourself. So if you're not caring about that, then you're only competing on price, which is a terrible place to play from. So if we go through the layers that a buyer is looking at when they're making that purchasing decision, it's not just the product. And I think sometimes it can be frustrating when you have a product and you know it solves someone's problem, but they do not realize that it would solve their problem. They don't immediately choose you because your competitor's got a shinier package or better branding, whatever it happens to be, right? That ultimately does matter when a customer is making a decision. And the reason why is, as they're going through these buying decisions, they're trying to determine, can I trust this company that's selling me this thing? And even if the people there are great, if the brand looks outdated, if it looks like they aren't competitive or quality product, even if it is, right, the functionality works great, there's still this bias to kind of measuring based on some of those attributes that may not ultimately matter from a product perspective, but matter from building a relationship and building trust. And brand is kind of that wrapping paper. It's the first layer that the customer hits when they're looking at trying to make a purchase decision. Who am I buying from? Product positioning is going to be the way that you have presented the solution to the customer and trying to make it relevant to them. So calling out all of the different dimensions that the customer needs to be considering and positioning it in a way that makes it very obvious to the buyer, this is relevant to me. This solves my problem. And really what can be hard is finding the right positioning with the same product, right? Because you've got a bunch of different buyers. Not everything in your product is going to be relevant to all of them. So what are the ones that we care about highlighting? And I use that word intentionally because highlighting or showcasing, right, is to make something more relevant to the audience, is to bring it up above the rest. And you have to make those decisions, with the recognition that the opportunity cost of highlighting too much, right? If you try to highlight 50 features, you've created a bundle of noise. The customer no longer knows what's relevant to them or what you're trying to tell them is relevant. So product positioning above and beyond just the product helps you differentiate your product, right? Because it helps you bring those aspects or dimensions of your product that are relevant to bear. Then we actually hit the product functionality, the stuff that you care about, right? And this is where you talk about your product's value potential. And I specifically use the word value potential here rather than functionality, because I think too often we tie our functionality to a specific solution. We say this functionality is for this, right? Without taking a step back and saying, what could this same functionality solve if we were using it in a different way? I think back to duct tape, right? If I'm only looking at duct tape as the very specific application of sealing ducts and preventing air loss, I am not recognizing the full value potential of duct tape. I love duct tape. It's a great solution for many problems, but that's kind of what I'm getting at, is your product actually has this level of value potential that is the functionality applied in a different way that hasn't been applied before. And when you hear companies pivot, and when they change what their business is and what their focus is, a lot of times, not just sometimes, but a lot of times, they're taking a large portion of their product and using it, right? They're not just throwing it away. That would be starting a new business. They're actually using what they've already built in a new way. Now there might need to be some augmentation done to make that happen, but what they're recognizing is our product has value potential that would be better applied elsewhere. Like we would get more, or we would solve better problems, or we would be differentiated if we took this product value potential and positioned it this way and branded ourselves this way, right? And that's more so what a pivot is kind of a big change in this entire value stream. And then behind all of that, you have the company value potential, and that is the people and the capital that you have to produce products. Take the product out of the picture, right? The company is configured in such a way that it is designed to service certain products. If you have a sales team, right, inherently you're assuming that you have something to sell, that your selling process or that your product needs someone to be in the room with the buyer, showing them, telling them, highlighting to them, and making relevant to that individual what your product is going to solve. If you are relying on sales teams, right, very often it's because the way that you've positioned your product is not immediately relevant, and the buyer is kind of not trusting that you can offer the solution. There's some amount of a demo needed, right? I need that one-on-one connection. I need to know who I'm dealing with, right? And that's where your sales team comes in. They're the ones that are going to build that relationship, build the trust with the buyer, and showcase your product in a way that's relevant to the buyer. Where we've kind of entered with kind of the modern product-led growth mindset is, if you take the sales team out of it, how do we get this entire chain of trust, of effective product positioning, of delivered value to the customer without a salesperson? Well, you would maybe need the ability to see the product firsthand, a free trial, actually create a freemium account, get value out of it before you upgrade, right? Those are different ways. Maybe it's just some sort of online tour that lets you go through the application and understand what the functionality is. Get some trust that it's not just mocks or prototypes on the website, but that the UI actually looks useful and usable, and that the functionality highlighted very nicely in the product positioning maps to the actual product that you would receive if you pay for it. All of those things matter, and how you configure your company to deliver this value stream is incredibly important. And ultimately what you're doing is mapping this as a value stream, right? You're saying, these are problems that our business solves. This is a configuration and alignment between our brand, our product positioning, what functionality we've built, the potential value of our product, and how we as a company operate to deliver that product to market. And you can think of that just as a big value stream that connects the company to the buyer. So what does this sometimes turn into? This is kind of an anti-pattern. This is what we call feature factory differentiation. And you see this very often. It's not that it is ineffective, it's just certainly not the best strategy for delivering a product, because ultimately what you're doing is bloating your product. So I guess I got to go into this a little bit more than just saying feature factory differentiation. What is a feature factory, right? And what you'll see is a lot of companies, they'll get their product out and they will begin to just add to it almost haphazardly, based on what customers ask for, right? And that's not necessarily a bad thing to listen to your customers, but you certainly can't add everything a customer asks for, because not everything that they want is going to be relevant to your general audience, right? And we've kind of already talked about how hard it is to position your product in a way that it can be relevant to the large market, right? And so if you start taking all of these one-off feature requests and saying, well, yeah, I can see where that's useful, right? I can see that adding a widget here or a button here or just one functionality, I want to customize this. Yeah, well, customization is great, because then we can make everyone's life better, right? Well, what you're starting to do is just adding noise to that list for majority of your audience, right? So if you take a 5% of your population that has this feature request and you build it for them, well, you've added a check mark for them that's relevant, but for the other 95% of your customer population is irrelevant. Now it's noise, it's bloat, it's in my way. And you can think back to the 90s when you had Microsoft Word, and there was just this toolbar nonsense all over the place. And then you had this, Microsoft Clippy, this paperclip that gave you useless tips and tricks while you're trying to get work done, right? It's just like, is that relevant? Does that actually solve the problem for the large majority? How do you focus, right? And so that's ultimately what you need to be thinking about when you're considering more features, right? Is, is it going to be relevant for just one person? Is it going to be relevant for your entire group of customers? What are each of them looking at and seeing when they're looking at that feature list, right? And maybe a feature list isn't even the best way to position your product, right? But you see it a lot, so want to use it as an example. But if we're thinking about the customer's perspective, you've got one customer who's looking at this and saying, okay, these are the bits that I care about, right? Like, this is all that matters to me. Don't care about that. Don't care about that. Don't care about all that other stuff, right? Like, stuff is jumping out to them as a buyer, and they're kind of pinning in on that. If you've got pricing tiers, for example, there's going to be one pricing tier to them that is obviously the one that's meant for them. You hope, right? Like, if you positioned it well, you want it to be that easy. You want it to be immediately relevant. Oh, that's the one I should go for. And sometimes, you see the companies highlight that with like a most popular banner at the top. And then what they are saying is, this is the most relevant for the majority of the people who come to this page. Some people might find a lower tier relevant. Some people might find the enterprise tier, or whatever the high tier is, relevant. But they're trying to highlight or showcase, this is most likely what's relevant to you. We're getting to a point with technology where we can kind of reposition those features a little bit better. But in any case, this is the problem with more features, is the more you add to this list, the more you are telling potential customers, we have a lot of irrelevant things in our product. These are not relevant. This might have more than you need, right? And when you think about that price justification, at least this is how I've seen it, and I've seen some counter arguments, so I'll present that side too. What I tend to think through is what is the value I'm getting per dollar, right? And so if I see all of these features and I've got $100 associated to it, if I'm determining that 50% of these are irrelevant, it feels to me like I'm paying $50 that I shouldn't, right? It's that $50, the half of the features here, I'm not getting the bang for my buck. Now, that's obviously not how value works. That's clearly, you probably have the most value that your product generates in one feature, and everything else is just kind of like, yeah, we have features, right? We've added some things, but really this one check mark is the most important check mark. And that's where all the value comes from. But to a customer, they sense noise, they sense irrelevance. And to them, they're paying for things they don't use. And they get into the software and they only go to one part of the software every day, and they see all of these new features get added that don't mean anything to them. It just starts to feel more complex, more complicated, more of a pain. They feel like they're paying for more than they're getting. They'll try to negotiate, right? If you've got a salesperson, they'll be like, not all of that is relevant to us. Only this is relevant. Can you guys come down on the price a little bit? And that's kind of where you get into that negotiation a little bit on the sales side, where if you've got a product-led growth, it's one price, and you have to make sure that it is all relevant and keep that list very tight and focused. And that's really where differentiation comes into play, right? You have to focus if you're going to have effective differentiation. You have to decide, what problems does your product solve? What problems does your business solve? And what customers have those problems? Because that is the only way that you can align this entire layer of brand, positioning, product, and company to deliver value to that customer. So if we look at the market and we say, we've got different customers that are worth different amounts to us, we've got a subset here that have high willingness to pay. We've got a subset that are low willingness to pay. Maybe the low willingness to pay is bigger. There's a lot more of them, but maybe there's also, competitors, right? So where does the competition play? And I hate to say that you should never go into a market that's crowded, because that's obviously not the case. If you go into a crowded market, the one thing you know is that that market has been validated. The problem exists for sure because people are selling and they're finding success, but then you're kind of competing with each other. And the question is, how do you maintain differentiation when everyone is copying each other's features, right? And so part of this is there a subset of these customers that are underserved? There's not many competitors, and are they worth serving? If that's the case, that's kind of a really nice place to focus, right? There's kind of this combination of not a lot of competition, high willingness to pay, there's value there for the business. Go after that, right? If there's competitors everywhere, and really you're trying to find a niche to serve that specific segment better, what you have to understand is not focusing means that you're applying your resources to all three of these customers when you're trying to beat a competitor in a specific segment, right? You're trying to say, we're going to try to beat them here, and we want to win here. You have to focus your resources and all of the value stream producing components in your business towards solving that segment. It's hard to make that decision because you're trading off all of the other things you could be doing, right? You could be going after the entire market, and you certainly see a lot of contention going on and arguments, between executives about where should we be focusing right now, right? But at the end of the day, you have to focus. You have to choose where you're going to focus. It could be that we want to focus on a big bite of this market. We're going to focus on two segments and maybe not the third. But to understand what is relevant to those customers, what dimensions you need to focus on, you have to choose. And ultimately, what you can do to kind of compare where you're at in a specific market with competitors is break down the dimensions that you are comparing your product against other competitors, right? What are the different dimensions that are relevant to customers? Where is your value potential? Are you delivering a lot of value relative to your competitors? Maybe less? Are you not even, you not have certain functionality or certain dimensions of your product that are relevant to the market and your competitors have those? You have to kind of understand where your product is, where the competitor is, and kind of map that out. And so I'll kind of give an example as I'm going through this. Let's take a look, get away from software, make it kind of a simple example. Let's think about pools, community pools. How do community pools compete against each other, right? So I live in a neighborhood, and I have two options for my kids to go swim. One, maybe the YMCA, the other is a smaller community pool that has the swim team or whatever, right? What I'm going to look for is what are the different dimensions that I can compare against. So maybe, one has swim lanes, concession stand. They have maybe, an adult swim time. Let's say a kiddie pool. You get the gist, right? You just slice it up and figure out what are all the different things I could compare. And we'll take, product X here will be, the competitive swim team pool, right? So they've got swim lanes. They don't have a concession stand. They don't have adult swim. Maybe they don't have a kiddie pool. It's focused on competitive swimming, right? And then we'll just add swim team here so that we can make this relevant. So we go to the other pool. Other pool doesn't have swim lanes, but they've got a concession stand. It's not the greatest concession stand in the world. They do split up kids and adults. They don't have a swim team, right? And then maybe we'll just throw in a pool cleanliness as an example. How clean are the relevant pools, right? And we'll say Z, they've got those kids swimming in the pools, going to be a little less clean than the focused high adrenaline competition that only gets used, for practice and for swim meets. So we'll put this up here. Okay. So now we've kind of gone through and mapped our comparison, the dimensions, and kind of where each of these play. Now let's say that there's an obvious, competitor mindset. This is our segment A. This is going to be the competitive swimmer, right? The things that matter to them is kind of obvious, right? That's clearly where that pool's going. And we'll just do this other kind of group of, adults that are looking for, a pool to choose from. And then we'll go kind of the family, which is going to be segment C here with this yellow color. And what is relevant to them, right? So you kind of created this threshold of where they are and where things are good enough. And that's kind of where the line is here for each of these segments. So we've kind of mapped product X is going to be that competitive swim type pool. Product Z is going to be that more family oriented type pool. It's got your standard stuff, right? And then we've created 3 different user segments or customer segments for this market, and where they kind of stand is it needs to be at least this good for me to consider this as a solution. And if we look at this, what we'll start to see is, the competitive swimmers have an obvious solution for them. What's going to be obvious is going to be swimming pool X. For the families or that kind of user group C, it's kind of obvious for them. They're going to go to, product Z, swimming pool Z. But this group of kind of like, maybe let's call them like independent adults, young adults, they're looking for a cool pool to go to, right? They need something that product X doesn't offer, but they also are dissatisfied with the pool cleanliness, right? They really have a high bar for pool cleanliness because they're trying to hang out and have friends and kind of mingle. So there's a gap there for that specific audience. And if we think about what would product X need to do and what would product Z need to do in order to capture that specific segment, they would need to meet that minimum threshold of cleanliness. Where product X fails is they don't have adult swim. So product X could say, okay, we want to compete for that segment. We need to come up with some way that we can solve their needs. Maybe we take down the lanes and give that adult swim at 6 p.m. or whatever, and we kind of pivot into this world of offering some limited amount of concessions. So we're going to say product X adds some amount of concessions, and then an adult swim, right? And they now could compete for that. Well, product Z could come in and potentially just clean up that pool. It might be hard though, right? So, we're trying to capture that not just cleaning the pool, but coming away with the product positioning and the brand of being a clean pool, right? Like it's not just a matter of cleaning the pool. We have to make sure that this audience now knows we clean the pool. It's the cleanest pool. We got certified, right? The Clean Pool Association gave us a prize for 2020, whatever it is, right? We have to demonstrate that we've solved that need. So you can start to see how this type of mapping helps you focus. Where do we need to add to solve certain segments' problems? Where do we compete? You may, if you've read Blue Ocean Strategy, see this kind of map used in that book. This is a great way of comparing a lot of different competitors and what dimensions they compete against. The plays here, you can add, you can remove things that are no longer relevant. You can increase your investment or decrease your investment in any one dimension. So this kind of this game board, if you're using this as a way of mapping your products, those are really the ways you move. We're gonna add a new dimension that is relevant and nobody solves it. We're gonna reduce or remove a dimension that is irrelevant. We're gonna increase or decrease, right? maybe a little bit of a long, belabored example on swimming pools. But what I really wanted to get at was this way of thinking about how people make decisions and how they purchase products. This is how they do it, right? They figure out what matters to them, and they try to compare all of the options available. And if there are some things that matter more to me, and I have to kind of weigh, like in an example here where I am an adult swimmer, but neither of these pools really matches my needs, what I'm likely going to do is figure out, well, which one, could I get away with, or which one has at least more of my needs met. They would likely go with that product Z or that swimming pool Z in this example, because the only thing that it doesn't meet for them is pool cleanliness, right? Which is a big one, but maybe they care more about just the ability to do adult swimming, not having the lanes. All right, I'm going to move on from that example. I spent way too much time on that. The next thing that we'll talk about from a differentiation perspective is the Kahn model. I will try to make this as streamlined as possible since I spent so much on the last one. Two dimensions here that you're thinking about when you're evaluating any specific feature or functionality that you're considering. Satisfaction that it brings to the customer, and then the value potential, or how much you're investing in that feature, how much functionality do you offer on that dimension. And really what this model is trying to help you do is determine what type of functionality it is and how it drives value and satisfaction for your customer. So there are three types, and really this isn't a perfect mapping, it's just a framework to help you think through your product. There are going to be delighters, and what you think about is that there is this kind of line of indifference, okay? Right here in the middle. Satisfaction above that line is positive, right? I'm adding satisfaction. And when you think of a delighting feature, if you don't have anything, you're over here, the customer doesn't really know. Like a delighter feature is something they don't expect, right? Delight is a kind of surprise to them. Their expectations, they never had any. So now that you actually have this, it's kind of like, oh, wow, I really like that, right? So the more you invest in a delighter feature, the more satisfaction you get. And these are really important to have if you want to differentiate your product. You need to have something that makes customers go, wow, that was awesome. I need to tell my friend about that, right? They're hard too, because it's hard to surprise people. If you've sold them a product and it does what you say, their expectations are kind of met. But doing those delighter type features can really amp up your product. There are going to be things that are run of the mill. You have it or you don't. And these are the kinds of things that are, pretty standard features. They're not table stakes. It's not like if you don't have it, you've completely lost. But in some aspect of this, these are, the more you have of this, the more value you generate, right? So this is going to be kind of this straight line, and these are called the performance features. And really, this is what you need to have to perform the function that you've promised to the customer. And if you've got some amount of these, it's not full value potential. You haven't invested everything, but you've got some minimum level, then customers are indifferent. The more you have of it, the more satisfaction you provide. If you don't have it and the customer's expecting it, well, they're not going to be very happy, right? It's down here in the bottom left. And then there are things that you could have them, but having them is expected. And these are going to be, I think the easiest way to label these, I know this isn't the official Kahn model canon, but table stakes. You got to have this. If you have everything, if you have absolutely 100%, you've invested in this feature, I am indifferent. I'm on this indifferent line because I expect you to have it. This is being a reliable service if you're a software as a service subscription, right? Being uptime, reliability. I expect you to be up. I expect to be able to go to your website, log in, and get access to the software, because that is table stakes. That is what I am paying you for. I'm not paying for downtime. If I wanted downtime, I'd host my own data center, right? That's table stakes. So there's three different lenses on the Kahn model of how you can look at individual features. If you look up Kahn model, if you really want to dig into this, there are tons of examples of this. But I think this is another way to look at individual dimensions and where you're at on that comparison chart, because some things that you do that nobody else does, that will be a delighter. Some aspects of that might be performance, some might be table stakes. The pool cleanliness in the last example, that might be table stakes. Like, people might expect a clean pool. And if you don't have that, well, you're out. All going to depend on your product. Really, what I want to emphasize more than anything is that features are easy to copy. A feature on a feature list, I mean, it's as hard as adding to that sales page another box, the check mark in it, right? And you certainly see some teams go after check marks. They go, oh, they've got that feature, well, we'll do that too. Some features are not check marks on a list. They're not something that you can just add. They're more complex, they're more nuanced. They might look like they're just a check mark on the feature list, but to the customer, there's a lot more nuance. There's the end-to-end user experience. There is how that actually fits into their lives. Is it usable? Is it valuable to them? You might position it the same way, but it's a completely different product, a different experience, right? And if you think about the feature, it's easy to go add a check mark. If you think about the value stream, about the alignment between how the company sells the product, about how you build the product, what you're aiming for, you're aiming to make it relevant for them to solve that problem, and to truly solve that problem, not just say we have this solution, but to say beyond our solution, what we are trying to do is solve your problem, and we promise to do that with this product. That's how you position it, and your brand stands behind that. It's aligned with all of that, the statements that you've just made about your product. That is hard to copy. It's hard to really replicate that full end-to-end experience. And if you are a company that has made a decision to focus on a specific segment of customers, to know what is relevant for them and invest in the value potential to deliver value for that specific segment, that's an incredible investment. It's an incredible promise to make to a customer. And that is hard to copy, because the other companies that aren't making that decision, that are trying to serve the general population, that are really just trying to say, okay, what are all the features out there? Let's just get them on the list. They're not focused enough to be able to say, we are Signal in the noise of all the products you're comparing. We are relevant to you. And for this specific segment that you're relevant for, you want to be the shining, obvious solution, the one that they say, oh, well, it's clear that I go for them. It's clear that I buy that product because no one else is focusing on my problems. No one is as relevant to me. So some steps thinking through this: choose your focus customer. And that it's a lot boiled into a single line. It's not easy to do this. It's not easy to say we're going to focus exclusively on this customer, or to make a decision about what you're not going to do. But you have to choose where you're going to focus if you're going to build a great product. Then you have to discover what is relevant to your focus customer. You have to ask them. You have to get into interviews. You have to know them. You have to empathize with that customer and really know, what are they looking for? What is relevant? What's sometimes hard in B2B software is you've got the buyer and stuff that's relevant to them. You have the user and who's going to actually use this product. And you have to solve the user's problems, but make it relevant to the buyer. And that's kind of an interesting dichotomy. You certainly don't want to sacrifice your user for the buyers, what is relevant to the buyer. But if you focus only on the user and not on what is relevant to the buyer, then you're never going to sell a single unit, right? So discover what is relevant to both and solve for both of those. If it's B2C, obviously it's a little bit simpler. You have a buyer and a user that are theoretically the same. Evaluate your company's ability to deliver a profitable value stream. this is something that sometimes gets missed. It's a great idea, it's a great product, it's a great solution, but it's not profitable. We don't have a way to make this profitable that doesn't align with our business model. You want to evaluate that even till the end of right before you're about to ship it. Make sure that it's something that can work for your business, right? Hopefully you got on ahead of that and have determined, this is viable before you started building. But if it's unviable and it would be a detriment to launch it, and it would actually cost you more to produce that, even on the final day right before shipping, you make that obvious aha insight that it's not going to be profitable, it's not going to be successful. It's worth having the conversation. Should we ship that? Should we commit to this when we know it's not the right decision for us? There's some amount of this that should also be considered of whether you can maintain that differentiation long-term. If this is a moat, if it's hard to replicate, if this is just an easy value stream, you should expect some amount of competition, and what you should be looking for is how to protect that and protect other competitors coming in. It's inevitable, right? That competitors will try to copy what works. So as a product team, you're going to continually have to do this exercise of saying, okay, what's the market look like? Where's our opportunity? Where do we want to win? How do we continue to be relevant to these customers? Once you've done all of those things, figure out how to align the organization to deliver that value. If it is that you have built a great product, you positioned it well, you've sold it, but customers are coming in and having a hard time because they need a little hand-holding, and it's worth building a customer success organization, maybe you need to figure out where do you put your customer success manager? Where is their time best spent? Which of these customers that you're bringing in, because they're still not going to be homogenous. Even though you focused on a specific type of customer, there's still going to be nuance there. Where do you focus your customer success team's time to solve those customers' problems, right? You have to continually evaluate that entire value stream above and beyond just the product, because your product fits into this bigger ecosystem. And what you're responsible for as a product manager is not just the small box that says product value potential. You are responsible for finding the products that fit into that overall value stream and actually realize benefit for the customer. There's a philosophical disconnect if you have a product organization in your company that doesn't care about that. If your organization is just focused on checking boxes to make sales, but isn't focused on actually delivering the outcomes you promise to customers, you don't have a product team. And it's a hot take that I have heard Marty Kagan make, I've heard many others make, and it's one that I believe. If you do not focus on realizing the benefit you're promising your customer, you're not a product team. And you can put the label product manager on the person who's shipping that, but that is not a product manager. At best, that's a project manager. What you need to be focusing on is finding ways to deliver value, to be relevant to the customer you're focusing on, and to make that a profitable and defensible value stream for your business that actually works in the context of your team, your organization, the capital you have, and the skill sets you've developed. So hopefully that's, if you disagree with that, feel free to share thoughts on why you disagree. I'm open to conversation, but that's what I've seen, at least long-term, that I find to be ethical product management. There's certainly business outcomes that can be realized without a good product. But the question at hand there is, do you really need a product manager if you're able to make money without delivering value? Probably not. You just need great salespeople who oversell and underdeliver. Okay, I've taken a tangent there. Let's take a step outside the ivory tower, the academic conversation here. Let's maybe break down a modern example of differentiation, right? What I've seen recently is kind of a very hot topic, is the Zoom, Teams, Slack battle, right? Online remote collaboration. How do these differentiate from each other? Where are they focused? Are they all actually trying to solve the same problem? Um, I would say no. And I would say there's kind of key things that each of them is focused on, and where they differentiate themselves. And so we'll kind of break this down. Probably should do some amount of this charting. I'm going to do that. I'm just going to copy the slide here. And we'll go, let's go to the next slide here. Oh no. Okay, here we go. Okay, so we're going to do one of these. We're going to do one of these. I'm going to do some dimensions here. And there's so many dimensions to compare these, but we're going to do this. Ongoing chats. Well, what are some other dimensions for Slack, Zoom, and Teams? I'm sure this is going to be, since it's very, very quick here, imperfect, but we'll go through this. So we got Slack, Zoom, and Teams, collaboration, video quality, ongoing chat. We'll say file sharing, integrations. See, anything else that we want to call out as a distinct factor here? We'll go with the grid. We'll add in the grid. Really, I don't know if it's the grid so much as like, I'm not going to write this down, but I'm going to talk about the grid. You know, Zooms for a while was the one that had the gallery view. You could see all of the people on the meeting. You had 60 people, 100 people. You could see all of their faces. Teams has solved that problem a little bit differently. I want the problem to solve, right? I want to see everybody in the meeting, but it's not that I necessarily want to see them on this big grid. I just want to see their faces. I want to see their reactions. I want to focus on the social aspects of this meeting. And when I say something, I want to get a read from the audience. You know, did it land? Did I just, you know, piss off my executives? Did I say something that offended somebody? Did you know, I say something that half the room disagrees with? You're trying to understand, you know, how people are reacting to what you have. And so Teams, what they did is they kind of got that, like, they do the Zoom background filter, and then they take the people and they put them on chairs, and you can actually see this audience of people that you're looking at, right? It's not necessarily that I want to see the backgrounds of everyone. I want to see, you know, where they're at in all of the video. I want to see their faces, right? And so it kind of has that different type of view. So that's what we're talking about with the grid. Going like super deep on these specific dimensions, but, you know, maybe it's useful. So collaboration, you know, I think when we talk about collaboration, we're talking about, you know, you and I are working across a business day on a specific project. You know, Slack, I think, has been seen as the king of collaboration for a long time. And specifically here, we're going to take a step back from file sharing and things like that, because I think actually, if you look at Teams is going to win out on file sharing only because it's really, really solidly integrated in with the Microsoft Office suite. And so you're already using the Office suite, and maybe this is an asterisk, right? If you're using the Office suite, it's just all integrated. It's all together. They have this unified solution for file sharing, for teaming. Maybe it's a little bit less good on the collaboration side. The chat is a little bit weirder. It's harder to kind of have this ongoing chat experience. It doesn't feel as fun. You know, that's certainly something that you could put in Slack's bucket. So I'll say Slack's better here. Slack's probably a little bit worse at the file sharing. It's not that it's bad. It's just that it's relatively worse, right? If we look at the integrations piece, you know, I would say Teams does a fairly good job, again, with an asterisk. It's a good job integrating into the Microsoft stack. But if we're going to say who's the winner on integrations overall, probably Slack. That's kind of what they've been built on, is open integrations. You can integrate with anything and everything. And when we start to look at Zoom, relative to this, where does Zoom play? Collaboration, they probably don't even play in collaboration, I'd say. You know, there's really no way to collaborate with Zoom other than let's schedule a meeting, right? But that's not really collaboration, ongoing, offline, online collaboration. It's really just, you know, we've got really great video quality. We don't really have ongoing chat. We don't really have great file sharing. We've got some amount of integrations related to meetings. Got this great grid though. Tell you what, the grid, key. So we'll go, let's see, Slack, video quality, it's garbage. Step up maybe only to, you know, 2010s video quality, but it's not the greatest. It's good for one-on-ones, it's not group for meetings. We won't even put them on grid because they don't even offer that really that well. Teams, you know, I don't know. I haven't actually used the Teams sitting in a room feature, so I don't know how good that is. But let's just say for now, it hasn't quite surpassed Zoom's clean grid, right? Maybe there's some debate here on whether that's above or below Zoom on that dimension. But you know, looking at this, we can start to see Zoom is clearly not competing in certain segments of the market, right? They're not competing around this collaboration world. They're not worried about file sharing. What they are going to be the best at is video quality, seeing everybody, some amount of integration to make it easier to do that. But, you know, and you can go, you know, down the list of what Zoom competes on that these two aren't even, you know, even touching, like webinars and, you know, things like that. But for the purposes of we need to have meetings, it clearly has a place here when you need good video quality with large groups of people. Like Zoom wins, right? Okay, yeah, the clear decision maker there. Maybe I have more than one of these. Now, where it gets really interesting is the Slack and Teams dichotomy. And what Slack maybe has started to go into more recently is cross enterprise. What I mean here is not just within the organization, but between organizations. They kind of have that concept of shared channels. And this is you know, something maybe you saw Basecamp do with the client access to files, right? Is I'm now connecting this collaboration tool with the people that I collaborate in my day-to-day that are outside my company, right? And I think this is something that Slack has focused heavily on. They recently invested in kind of like this social profile where it kind of pulls in everything that's relevant about you from a business perspective, almost like the 2020 Rolodex. To really compete in this cross enterprise world, this dynamically connected collaboration environment that's beyond just this company, but to, you know, the companies that we work with. Now, do you see Teams maybe beginning to look at this type of integration in the future? Probably, because what you're seeing, you know, Slack is trying to differentiate. Slack's trying to go beyond that collaboration world. They actually have deprecated some of their video quality features, and I forgot to put Teams on here, but you know, maybe they're not that high. We'll put Teams somewhere right around here, just middle of the road. What you've seen Slack do is actually decrease their investment in video quality, right? In the video functionality. They used to have like screen sharing, and they were doing some investments around like, okay, we're gonna have meetings, and the Slack's the meeting tool. But they've actually decreased a lot of that investment. A lot of those features have been deprecated or been ramped back, and they've kind of sunset them because they've recognized where Slack wants to compete is not there. It's not going to be the video solution, because anyone who needs big meetings, big video meetings, is going to go to Zoom anyways, or one of those better video solutions. So where do we focus on instead? Well, we focus on solving the collaboration piece, solving the cross collaboration piece between companies. And we do that really well. We make it really easy to do file sharing, to integrate all of the solutions that you use, and to provide that seamless integration point for the business to come to and collaborate. So all of the tools feed into Slack. Slack becomes your hub for work. And Teams has a little bit of a differentiation because they have the Microsoft Office ties. They give it to you for free as part of that bundle. Slack's actually suing them right now because they see that as unfair, right? It's unfair to have a competing product baked into this established base of enterprise presence of Microsoft Office, which you kind of have to have unless you're using Numbers on a Mac, which is a terrible experience. Not great. All that to say, Slack is differentiating by focusing on this new value potential, this new pain point that they're going to try to be the best at, which is solving that conflict, that friction that has always been present in emailing links to those counterparties on the other side of the table, to the third parties that you're working with, vendors, suppliers, your contractors, having to coordinate across email rather than bringing them into where all the work is happening and having them be a part of that team and be able to have conversations easily, have a place for that conversation to actually take place, a channel, right, in Slack. That's what Slack is investing in. They're kind of investing in this social business ecosystem where they're kind of creating those connections and the place for work to happen. It doesn't matter, if you're having a contract signed or you're doing a deal, you can have those conversations take place in Slack, probably still using Zoom or Google Meets or some other video solution to have the video call when we're talking about it. But when I'm going to throw a file at you and I want that to have a place to live that's not just going to get lost in email, I throw it in our channel, right? And we kind of have that established place. So trying to give an example of where you might see this differentiation take place outside of this kind of academic world that we were talking about, of all these frameworks, and kind of give you another way of looking at how companies might differentiate themselves. At the end of the day, when I'm looking at a solution here, what is relevant to me? Clearly, if I've got Microsoft Office, Teams might be relevant because it's going to be super easy from a file sharing perspective because it's already baked in. It's kind of like what SharePoint should have been. It's the next evolution, right? Teams is kind of bringing that together. It's free. That's certainly a competing point. But if I'm really looking for a hub of work, if I'm looking to integrate a bunch of solutions that aren't just Microsoft solutions, if I'm looking for what has been proven to be like the collaborative winner, I'm probably going to take a stab at Slack, right? I'm going to pay for that because I'm really looking for more than what Teams can offer on those dimensions. If I'm okay with the level of collaboration, and this kind of goes back to those, those lines of where is my threshold? If I'm okay having a subpar collaborative experience, and I don't care about this cross-enterprise thing, I'm just focused on providing collaboration tools for my business internally, maybe I go with Teams. It's free, it meets my needs, so on and so forth. And this is where it comes again. Who is your customer? What's relevant to them? Who are you focusing on? Slack is obviously focusing on a different type of customer that needs more integration capabilities, needs more of a customized business solution that separates out from just the Microsoft Office world and more into how do we actually get work done and who are we working with, right? And so that's where Slack kind of wins on this cross collaborative world. Okay, I think that's enough of an example. I'm sure there are a lot of things that I have not talked about that would be relevant to note between these three. There are probably other players, but this is a good way of just kind of throwing something at the wall and seeing what sticks, right? Open to thoughts, appreciate your feedback. Yeah, we'll talk more about this in Slack, I'm sure, but that's where we're at. Thanks, and we'll see you on Slack. Bye.